Well, first I'd like to welcome you, Professor Guilhem, to my show. I'm Carl Zha, the host to the Silk and Steel podcast, and I focus primarily on China, history, culture, and politics. And Guilhem here is a sinologist with lots of experience working in China. So I have heard a lot about you from our mutual friend, Marcel. And I have just find out about your new book, which is all about ancient Chinese poetry. So my question for you, first of all, is how did you get interested in China and Chinese culture?
Completely by chance. You see, when I was in secondary school, they opened the Chinese course. It was in 1967, maybe. At the time, you see, people were quite considered to learn Chinese was a little bit crazy thing, you see. And but I was attracted by, you see, to discover a language and a civilization which was with no point of comparison with Europe. Because when you go to the States, to Latin America or elsewhere, you got even to India, you have comparisons. But in China, it was another human experience to discover. And so I was attracted. And I was attracted by the characters. When I began to study Chinese, you see, I saw the aesthetics of the characters. And I was quite interested by calligraphy, by talking, etc., and also by the civilization of China, which was a great, you see, history. And when I was after that, when I chose, when I finished my secondary school and I went to the university, I jumped to the second year in Chinese. You see, because I had already studied Chinese, and at the same time, so I specialized in a way in China for 3 years. I had my master's degree, then I went to Hong Kong to teach French in Hong Kong, and I was staying also at New Asia College with a lot of Chinese intellectuals at the time. It was a very stimulating environment. I was also in the University Service Center, which was a good place to study Chinese modern history with a lot of newspapers, people coming, always coming from China, with whom we had exchanges. So it was a very nice opportunity. Then I traveled when I was going to Hong Kong, and when I was coming back, I traveled to Indonesia, I traveled to all these places, to Malaysia and to Thailand, and I went back.
So I want to ask you about your travel to Indonesia because I have personal ties to Indonesia. I'm wearing an Indonesian batik shirt. I have settled in Bali. My wife is Balinese. You are obviously a very adventurous soul because in the 1975, Indonesia is definitely off the tourist beaten track for the tourism, I imagine.
In 1975, you see, you had some tourist spots, which were, of course, Bali was already deserved, but you could go to places in Bali, and it was not so well developed as today. You see, I guess I haven't been in Bali for maybe 30 years, so I guess it's horrible now.
It's different.
It's quite different. Yeah. But at the time it was quite cool. You see, to stay in Bali, and then also the Lombok and Sumbawa were completely wild places.
Yes.
I remember I went to the northern part of Lombok. It was completely wild. You see.
It's so you came to study China and Chinese during the Cold War, and for much of the Cold War, the mainland China wasn't really accessible. China hasn't opened up yet. So how did you go about it? At that time, kind of learning China from a distance.
Well, it was an opportunity to be in Hong Kong was a good spot. You see, to see China from the outside because you could meet people and speak very freely about China. And at the time, I met a lot of ex-Red Guards who were from my generation. You see, so we had a lot of talks, and I was reading a lot about Chinese modern history because I was doing a thesis on Yen An, on literary debate, and you see the rise of Mao in Yan'an, etc. So it was a preparation. And when I went to China itself for the first time, it was in '79. And I spent 3 months in Beijing and all around China, going down to Hong Kong, Canton, Hong Kong. And it was a nice experience, of course. I met a lot of people. And I went back. After that, you see, either for study, for missions of during my PhD or after my PhD, or for as a tour guide, you see. So that was an opportunity to travel anywhere.
You are probably one of the first foreigners, Westerners, who have traveled to China after China opened up. I mean, '79, that was pretty early on. And I remember you mentioned you actually traveled to Xinjiang in the early 1980s. And that must be a very different place back then, because I watched the Japanese NHK documentary on Silk Road, which was filmed in Xinjiang from the same period you went, like 1979, 1980s, and it looks so different.
Yeah. I guess it was not a touristic organization. At the time, you see, we just stopped whenever we want. You see, we had a bus, and I was seeing a fort sometime one day, and I said to the driver, "Can we stop here?" We stopped, and it was a fort built during the Qing times. But we went all around, and I fall on a tomb which was opened with, you see, a rest of a man who was buried.
Oh, wow.
Buried there, you see. So then I told the local museum, you see, to look for that thing, because it was the tomb was stolen. You see, this kind of thing you could see at the time. You see, because it was completely. I mean, there was nobody, just the local people were.
Yeah. Today, there will probably be a big tourist site with people selling souvenirs.
Yes. And it was near Jiayuguan.
Oh,
you
wow.
see, and Jiayuguan, I remember it was, I took a lot of photographs at the time. It was a nice place to go.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in Chinese poetry?
Well, that's very simple. I've been writing poetry myself for the last 40 years. So I was fascinated also by Chinese classical and also modern poetry. And because the modern poetry is also influenced by the classical poetry, you see the strengths of images, you see the characters, I mean the Chinese characters are the same, of course, and they're also, and So I had been reading a lot of Chinese classical poetry since the 80s.
Wow.
And after that, once I decided to reconcile, you see, my interest with writing poetry with Chinese classical poetry. So I began to collaborate. I met specialists of the Tang poetry in Shanghai. His name is Sun Qing'an, and I just met him. He was in the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. He was leading the Chinese Institute, the Chinese Classical Chinese Literary Institute, and I told him about this project just to present, you see, the most well-known poems, and he said, "Oh, that's a good idea." He reacted very quickly, and then we had the opportunity to work for 4 years together. Each time I went to China, he was traveling with me. You see, at the time it was I had credit from a big institute in France, so there was no problem, no financial problem to go to China. As it was just a question of time, you see. So we went together to see all the places where poets, classical poets, had lived, you see. Li Bai, Tu Fu, Su Tongpo, we went to all their places, to a lot of places. We went to Hubei for 1 month. We went to Sichuan for practically 1 month. We went to Xinjiang. We went to Anhui.
Wow.
To a lot of places together by bus, by all means of communications. And we interviewed a lot of people who were local specialists of these poets. So we had first-hand, we had a ground, you see, field work. We had a field work. And besides, I was advised by Sun Qing'an, of course, about all what was produced, you see, in Chinese, the best production of the poets, the best studies of the poets are in Chinese. And so I used this material, of course, and I also used the foreign studies, you see, like Stephen Owen, or French, English, American studies on China. And I made a kind of synthesis of all these things to approach each poet with a new vision, I think, in this book. It's a new vision of poetry, which is not the common vision of this.
So that's how this book came about.
Yes,
and
this book came about. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about, for the readers who might not know, what is this book is about? Is it just about introduction to Chinese poetry, or?
Yes, it's about, first you have the Chinese texts of the most well-known poems, a translation in French, which is real poetry. I think most of the translations are good in French, but they are not poems.
Right.
And I have written poems. Just the translation tries to give the idea of the poetic effect. As a Chinese reader, you see, you can feel, you see emotion or deepness of a text or beauty of a text, and these three qualities. So this is the first thing, the translation. But the main work, the main added value of this book, because there are so many anthologies, is the presentation, you see, of the poems, of the poets, because it took me 5 years to work on it, mainly on writing these presentations, you see. Each time I was for studying Li Bai or Du Fu, it was 4 months, 5 months of work, you see. And there are 55 poets presented here.
So this not only cover the poems, but you will cover a little bit about the poets who wrote about them.
Yes, it's a context of the text.
Ah.
It's a kind of, you see, history of China through the most well-known poets. Because I have put a kind of, I have made a chronology. You see, I've presented the poets in chronology in order to follow the evolution mainly of the Tang and Song dynasty. So you can have also a living vision of the history of China through poets.
That's perfect.
That's kind of, it's different from, you see, history book, but in the same time it's history, but I mean it's history through personal, you see, through living.
Yes.
Living persons, and also it has been, I had the chance to have the agreement of Yang Yongliang. Yang Yongliang is a famous photographer with work you can see from his studio.
Yeah.
He's working in New York and Shanghai. He teaches in I think in fine arts or photography in Shanghai. And he has a very interesting vision of photography, because his photographs, you see, it's a kind are a combination of the Song dynasty paintings like Fan Quan, and also you have a kind of all kinds of you see.
Yeah,
it's a kind of critic of the modernist time. So,
right.
so it's called Artificial Wonderland. You see this this picture, and it's marvelous.
So for I'm just noticing right now when Guilhem pointed out to me, at first I thought this was just classical Chinese landscape painting, but when I look closely, I see these are actually photos of modern China, because you have like construction cranes everywhere. There's a building in the midst of being demolished and being rebuilt, and so this is both the traditional and modern China coming together.
And that leads me to another point of this book, which I've also discovered through discussion with Sun Qing'an. It is the first book which introduces the way that Chinese poems are used between Chinese people to interact. I mean, when I want to interact with someone in some special occasion, I cite a poem. I can cite a poem. So this habit was present in some, of course, in Chu Xiaolong, you see novels about people are used to it in China, but in foreign countries they don't understand how Chinese can use Chinese poems, you see, to interact between themselves, or you see. So this is the use of poetry which maintains the poetical tradition, you see.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, because I currently I'm on my own podcast. I do a podcast about Chinese history, and I'm doing a chronological retelling of Chinese history from the very beginning. I covered to about 300 BC right now, and the period I just covered, which is the spring-autumn period, when there's a lot of Chinese philosopher, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi lived. I'm basing a lot of my podcast content on this Chinese narrative history called Zuo Zhuan. And what struck me when I was reading through Zuo Zhuan is that how, just as you mentioned, these Chinese elite, they use poetry as a tool of communication with each other. And everybody just, when they recite a poem, they kind of instinctively understood what the other guy meant by reciting that poem. There was a particular case when a crown prince who was he's thinking he's in danger of losing his position as a crown prince because he has been exiled by his father to be a governor of a far-flung province. So he sent his envoy to his dad to find out what his situation is. So the envoy obviously can't say it directly to the king, you know, what do you intend to do about your son? So instead he used poetry. He will cite the poetry about, he said, he said, when the king was asking how his son is doing, he said, he's studying poetry. He recites these poems all the time. And the poem that he recited are a poem about longing, about missing the family connection. And then the father immediately understood what that means. He said, okay, is my son not happy about where he is? You know, did he have complaints about me? And then he sent the envoy back to his son with a box. He instructed can only be opened when he sees the crown prince. So when the crown prince received the gift from his father, he opened the box, and it's just a bunch of clothes, but in very disorderly, disheveled fashion. The envoy didn't understand. So I was very careful with the gift. You know, I did not disturb the content of the box. But the son immediately understood. He said, well, there was a poem there was a poem from the Book of Songs that says the official was, he woke up, hurriedly put on his clothes out of totally out of order. It's because he need to rush to the court to pay homage to his sovereign. This is actually my dad is telling me to come home. So all this message was sent without explicit mentioning of anything.
This is exactly the first chapter of the book is on the Shijing, on the book of odes, and I cite, you see, examples of this use of poems between Chinese diplomats of the time or Chinese sovereigns. But that was poetry is for me a kind of also of a way of life also. That's not only writing, you see, it's a way to look at things and to live things. I live in the countryside actually, so I'm not far from the Chinese tradition of
hermit philosopher.
Hermit.
So you must have, you have experienced the full breadth of China for the last 40, 50 years. The China that you have studied, you learned and traveled through must have changed a lot. How did that affect your perception of China, if any?
Well, at the beginning of the 80s, I was quite doubtful about Chinese reforms. And after 1984, when China really opened to, you see, the foreign capital, foreign technology, I began to work, you see, on with foreign companies and also with experts, foreign experts in China. And I had another vision of the things, because at the time I was studying, you see, I was doing another PhD on economics. You see, I was studying economics in a French institute. And I began fascinated, more and more fascinated with Chinese reforms. And for maybe 30 years, you see, I've two interests: economy and poetry. that's not necessarily, you see, incompatible. But I was fascinated by the rhythm of Chinese economic reform, the pragmatism of the reforms. Of course, we had this 1989 protest movement, but I had written, you see, at the time, you see, just before the movement began, I made a long article, I remember, in Le Monde Diplomatique, which said there was inflation and corruption at the time, you see, in 88, 89. I was coming back from China and I made an article on saying inflation and corruption comes from, you see, have a lot are linked with the allocation of resources, with distortion in the allocation of resources, and finally it's a political question now which is raised, and there might be a kind of political answer to it. It was before, you see, this movement, and then the movement happened. And I came back to China in 92, maybe. After a few years, I came back to study, you see, at the time, you see, I was studying in a kind of the border trade, with border trade, Chinese border trade with I took the example of Burma, and I discovered at the time, you see, the intensity of the traffic, you see, the drug traffic. And I met a few friends who were working on the drug traffic at the world level, and I made some studies on drug trafficking with the United Nations and under a United Nations program. We had a field study on India, China, Mexico and Brazil. You see, it was a big project. And when we had finished this project, we came back to China and presented our results with the Academy of Institute of World Economics and Politics at the Academy of Social Sciences. So but I mean, this was field study on this aspect, but mainly, you see, I was fascinated each time I was coming to China by the difference. You see, in 6 months, there was something new. You see, 6 months after, there was something new, which was completely changing all the time. Too quickly, maybe, you see, because people had not the time to adapt themselves to such, you see, huge transformation. But after that, after 2010, I began to work on Chinese innovation policy, because I was seeing that innovation was a key, you see, to the development. You see, China had already begun the World Factory, but now the next stage was to change its economy from, you see, growth, etc., to innovation-led growth. And I worked a lot on innovation, and I made a few articles on this field. And I had a very different position from the other economists who were criticizing China at the time, saying that China was just copying. See, I'd made no breakthrough innovation. I was saying, but it's not the question, you see. Who invented the movie, the aviation industry, and the car industry? The French and the British at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Who developed these industries? United States, 20 years later. Because it had such a big market that it could, you see, develop, organize, you see.
Yeah.
So I was seeing China, you see, at the time as, you see, the Chinese market as a way of a kind of, with education, you see, a good education background which began at the beginning of the 2000, as you all know. You see, there was a huge development of higher education in China since 25 years. And as a key, you see, to this innovation policy and to this development. And now, and the last study was about artificial intelligence. So, and the key, you see, but I was also using, you see, other historical examples to show that it's not the question who makes the breakthrough innovation, you see. That's not the problem. I was saying during the Italian Renaissance was at the 14th century. At the end of the 14th century, the beginning, the 15th century, Quattrocento. 14th century, beginning of the 15th century, between the 1470 to 1550. Well, but so Italy was the heart of innovation in science and in the art. Why? Because the people at the time were educated in the same time in science and in art. You see, Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, but also he was also an engineer. Michelangelo was an architect, a sculptor, and a painter, see, in the same time. So there was this combination of people who led to this education background, who led to strong innovation, you see. But who led the world in the 16th century? Italy was not existing as a power. It was transferred to Spain and Portugal, which divided the whole world because they used the people, you see, coming from Italy, like the navigators, like Columbus, etc., to lead their float, to lead their boats, you see, to navigate through the world and to discover. So the situation, it's a flow of people, which is the key. According to my, to my analysis, and now it's reversing to China, I guess, because of, you see, this reaction of this anti-science point of view of Trump and all this conservative background in the US.
You are early. You are very early, your analysis about both Chinese innovation and the way how the progress is being transferred from different regions of the world.
Yeah.
I think it's because it's rare for people with your breadth of knowledge, across history, economics, and poetry, and to put all that together. I mean, I'm very impressed because I'm only coming to realize what you said about how the market dominance in the application of technology, first from Europe to US and now from US to China, only maybe in the last few years. But you did this back in 2010, so you're a pioneer in, I think.
No. I've used also. You see, it's for among economists. It's a well-known assertion that market size determines innovation. You see, the strongness of the strength of innovation depends from the market. You see, so. It's not a personal discovery, but I just wanted to make comparisons. You see, historical comparisons between innovation and breakthrough innovation, because most of the people were saying that China had not made any breakthrough innovation.
Right.
Who invented internet? Of course, it's. US,
Gore, Al Gore. Al Gore claims the credit for inventing the internet. Yeah. Very few people could put all that knowledge together. There are people who understood maybe the development of Italian Renaissance that led to later the Portugal and Spain's dominance. But to put that together with today's economic development, very few people have done that. I think it's because today there's not many people who really study history or have a classical education or apply those knowledge to the present.
But to analyze the present, you have to see the past.
Yes.
You see, to analyze, if you want to look at the future, you have to see the past. So that's, and the tendencies are very moving. You see, in terms of innovation, you see, of course, there is on the Chinese internet, for instance, you see the WeChat application. It's crazy, you see, this application, because it combines, you see, a few things which are completely separated in the US or in Europe. You see, you have different applications, you see, and Weixing is what we call all-in-one. You see, it's all-in-one. You can talk, you can transfer money, you can, and in different, in the US or elsewhere, it's different companies which have their own application, etc., etc.
Yeah, Elon Musk.
It's a kind of innovation. Also, it means that's very convenient. Of course, there are also other sides. Social control, etc. We can see.
Well, Elon Musk and Zuckerberg have wished they have a super app like the WeChat or even Alipay for years now, but they haven't been able to successfully replicate one. They always accuse people, some people in the West always accuse China of copying, technology, but so far nobody has been successfully copied the super app concept
Absolutely.
of WeChat or Alipay.
And TikTok is the best example also. That's when TikTok was developed. It was already developed in the US in 2018 or 17. It was quite popular at the time. I said there's gonna be a problem in China. So it's a kind of dissymmetry, of course. But asymmetry of, in terms of exchanges. now this kind of transnational applications are really can raise also all kinds of problems in the future.
Well, that's why Trump administration right now is trying to erect a wall, right, between U.S. and maybe some European market to try to wall it off from the Chinese apps and Chinese technologies, including EVs or in TikTok case, they're trying to force China to sell TikTok to U.S. Whether that approach will succeed, I think that's remain to be seen.
It remains to be seen because, I mean, most of the Chinese economists now consider that Trump is in a kind of, the Chinese government actually see Trump as a kind of, he has his own contradiction, you see, because he cannot do his trade war and in the same time raise the stock market. So the stock market is something which is very important in the US because most of the people who are retired depend from the stock market, you see, and if it cannot, this trade war can't last for long, you see, because the stock market is going to go down. And so, I mean, the Chinese government now has a strong position because it can wait. Of course, it's not as strong as it seems because there are such problems in the Chinese economy itself with jobless among the young people, with the growth which is not as good as it is announced, I think.
But U.S. politicians, they're very good. They're also very good also in stock market. Nancy Pelosi is the best stock pickers of all time. Her track record beats most of the fund managers on the Wall Street because she has inside information. Well, Guilhem, with all the present trade wars and tensions between the East and the West, what are your thoughts about East-West cultural exchanges going forward, particularly China and the rest of the world?
Okay. I think that actually the best way to have exchanges is through audio-visual exchanges. I mean, because young people don't like to read so much.
True.
And they like to watch TV, documentaries, or you see films, fiction films. So that would be, in my opinion, the best way to learn or to see, to exchange, to understand the point of view of the other. And in history, as well as in literature, you see through fictions, through documentaries. So that's the best media. But in the same time, you have to look also what the people have in mind. Not only what do they live actually, but what do they bring, what do they have in mind themselves to understand the mentality of people. So that's an important part of exchanges, you see, because when you exchange with someone, you have to understand his background, his context. So that's why you see I've asked you question, because before this interview about your own path, you see. So I think that would be a great understanding, would be stimulated by a lot of audio-visual exchanges, you see, documentaries, films, all these things. So people talking, exchanging on their lives, you see, interesting or common people, you see, and there is so much now actually in China, there is a lot of work, documentary work, you see, people who are doing a lot of films, a lot of, you see, interviews. So we have to valorize this capital, this intellectual capital, in order that people from the outside understand better China. And at the same time, China has to open also to other kinds of fictions and to understand better, you see, what are the contradictions, also not only the, to present the societies in Europe or the US or elsewhere as something flat, you see, but evolution is made of contradictions. So to understand these contradictions and this also the inner part also of what people live.
I fully agree with Guilhem on audio-visual aid, because humans are visual animals. We respond better visually. And this is why everybody should subscribe to my YouTube channel, where they're going to watch our interview together. And another thing I like to add is that video games. Video games is amazing, actually, to spark young people's interest in learning about history, learning about other countries. And China actually has done a pretty good job recently with some blockbuster video games like the Black Myth Wukong. And I expect more to come. And now with all the young people playing video games, and sometimes they interact with each other on these cooperative online games. And that's another channel for the people-to-people exchange, which I agree is very important. People-to-people exchange, especially among the young people, because they are the future. Again, watch our interview on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Carl Zha, and go look up Guilhem's new book, which is on ancient Chinese poetry, but also their context, their stories, the story behind the poets. It's a labor of love and many years of research. People should look that up. Just so people know, this is not a virtual background. This is a real Pudong district of Shanghai behind us. And when Guilhem first traveled to China back in 1980s and 90s,
nothing was there.
There's nothing there.
There were just barracks. You see on Lujiazui, barracks.
Yeah, it was same when I left China for the United States in 1990. This was all barracks. Warehouses, farms.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just empty. Everything
empty.
Everything we see here was built in last 35 years.
Low things.
Yeah. This shows what's possible in one human generation, and I think that's actually quite inspirational.
One more question.
Go ahead. Question from audience.
So, how do you feel like comparing with top city in your country and your country, for example, to Paris and to New York, Shanghai with them?
Well, I think New York is great, but you will be nicer if New York clean up like Shanghai. So New York is a great city with a lot of energy, a lot of bustling, but you would be perfect if you were to be as clean and as safe as Shanghai. That's my take.
And Paris is a much smaller city. But the main part of Paris, what is good in Paris is that you can feel a little bit in the past, because all the city center, I mean, like the wall, which is as big as Pudong, has been built in the at the end of the 19th century. And it has remained in the same aspect, you see. So you can walk and discover, you see, the places where Baudelaire was living, where you see all the poets were living in the 19th century, or Nerval was living, you see, was studying, or since Romantics, you see, since 1860, it has not changed a lot, or since the beginning of the 20th century, it has not changed a lot.
But it's a breath of fresh air talking to you, Guilhem, because you kind of have the ability to synthesize all this information, including from history, to apply to the present. And I think that's very rare. And to be able to keep up with all these latest development that's happening today, as well as way in the ancient past. Is this book only in French right now?
It's only in French, right?
Okay. So guys, learn French. This has been a fascinating interview. For people to find your work, where would they go?
To this book first, and also to the Edition Floem, because on my poetry is also you have all the Edition Floem, which is
so
on the site, you see on the internet.
So
for my poetry, you see my...
People go purchase this book, learn French, and search for Guilhem Faber. This is and
I have also articles in English, of course.
Yes, and definitely follow good professor. I'm sorry, I keep on referring to as professor because you have such breadth of knowledge.
No.
Follow Guilhem. And thank you for everyone for tuning in to today's episode of Silk and Steel Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Carl Zha. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Hey, perfect timing.